He mocked her scars until he saw the tattoo that saved his life. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. A little uneven. Her shoes were scuffed at the toes, and she clutched a large, slightly crumpled manila envelope to her chest with an air of solemn importance, as if it contained state secrets or the map to a buried treasure. Ms. Holloway, a woman whose composure was legendary, who had faced down hostile takeover bids and irate board members without so much as a flicker of an eyelash, found herself, for a rare moment, utterly nonplussed. Children did not come to the executive floor of Sterling Valerius. Children, in Alastair Sterling's meticulously ordered universe, were an alien species, unpredictable, illogical, and entirely unwelcome. This one, however, stood before her desk with a quiet, unwavering determination in her wide, hazel eyes that seemed far too old, too knowing for such a small face. She wasn't crying, she wasn't fidgeting, she wasn't displaying any of the usual childish anxieties one might expect in such an intimidating environment. She simply stood there, waiting, her small chin held at a resolute angle. This was not a child who had merely wandered off from a lost parent. This was a child on a mission. The silence in the opulent reception area stretched, broken only by the hushed hum of the building's climate control and the distant, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping of Ms. Holloway's perfectly manicured fingernail against her polished mahogany desk. Alastair Sterling, oblivious in his cloud-born office, was about to receive a visitor who would defy all his protocols, bypass all his defenses, and perhaps, just perhaps, remind him of a language he had long forgotten, the language of the human heart. The little girl, clutching her manila envelope, was an anomaly, a tiny, unexpected tremor in the perfectly calibrated machinery of his life, a tremor that was about to send shockwaves through the foundations of his carefully constructed world. His day, already scheduled with the precision of a military campaign, was about to take a detour into uncharted territory, a territory for which no amount of wealth or power had prepared him. The Arctic fox was about to encounter a creature far more perplexing and potentially far more transformative than any he had ever faced in the brutal jungles of high finance. Ms. Evangeline Holloway, after a moment that stretched the boundaries of her legendary composure, finally found her voice. It was, as always, cool, crisp, and utterly devoid of inflection. "May I help you, child?" she inquired, her tone suggesting that the answer was almost certainly in the negative. The little girl looked up at her, her gaze direct, unwavering. "I'm here to see Mr. Alastair Sterling," she announced, her voice surprisingly clear and steady for one so small. "I have an appointment." Ms. Holloway's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched a fraction of an inch. An appointment? With Alastair Sterling? This child? It was on its face ludicrous. She prided herself on knowing every single entry in Mr. Sterling's meticulously curated schedule, a schedule that was guarded more fiercely than the gold reserves at Fort Knox. There were no appointments with small, determined girls in faded floral dresses. "I believe you must be mistaken," Ms. Holloway stated, her voice taking on a dismissive edge. "Mr. Sterling does not have any appointments with children. Perhaps you're lost? Is your mother or father in the building?" The little girl shook her head, her brown curls bouncing. "No, ma'am. I came by myself, and I do have an appointment. It's very important." She clutched the manila envelope tighter, as if to emphasize its significance. Ms. Holloway sighed inwardly. This was going to be tiresome. She glanced at the clock on her desk, a sleek, minimalist timepiece that, like everything else in this rarefied atmosphere, exuded an air of expensive, unyielding precision. Mr. Sterling was due to connect with the Tokyo office in precisely 17 minutes. He did not tolerate interruptions. He certainly did not tolerate unscheduled children. "I'm afraid there is no record of any such appointment," Ms. Holloway said, her tone firming, preparing to deploy the polite but impenetrable wall of executive denial that had thwarted far more formidable supplicants than this small, scruffy child. "If you'll give me your name, and perhaps the name of the person you were supposed to see, I could try to assist you." "My name is Lily Carter," the little girl said, her chin still held high. and I am here to see Mr. Alistair Sterling. About a job. A job? Miss Holloway almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost impressive, but also deeply problematic. She had a strict protocol for such situations, usually involving a swift, discreet call to building security. Yet there was something about this child, something in her solemn gaze, her quiet determination, that gave Miss Holloway pause. It wasn't defiance, not exactly. It was a strange, unshakable certainty, as if Lily Carter genuinely believed she belonged here, that her mission was not just important, but entirely legitimate. A job, Miss Holloway repeated, her voice carefully neutral, though a flicker of something. Curiosity? Amusement? Stir beneath her icy facade. And what sort of job would a young lady like yourself be applying for at Sterling Valerius Industries? Lily held up the manila envelope. It's all in here, she said. My resume and my proposal. Ms. Holloway stared at the envelope, then back at the child. A resume? From a 7-year-old? This was veering into the realm of the surreal. She should call security. She really should. It was the sensible, professional thing to do. But then she caught a glimpse of something in Lily's eyes, a fleeting shadow of worry, of a burden too heavy for such small shoulders, and for a reason she couldn't quite articulate, her hand, which had been hovering over the intercom button, hesitated. Alistair Sterling was a difficult man, a cold man, a man who had long since forgotten, if he ever knew, the language of childhood, of innocence, of simple, unadulterated hope. But Ms. Holloway, beneath her own layers of polished professionalism and carefully cultivated detachment, had once been a little girl herself, a little girl with dreams, with a fierce, determined spirit. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a tiny, almost forgotten part of her that recognized a kindred soul in this small, improbable applicant. Mr. Sterling is extremely busy, Lily, Ms. Holloway said, her voice a fraction softer now. He does not see unscheduled visitors, especially not for job applications of this nature. Lily's lower lip trembled just for a moment before she firmed it again. But he needs to see me, she insisted, her voice a little smaller now, but no less determined. It's about my mommy. She's in the hospital. The words, so unexpected, so stark, so utterly out of place in this sterile corporate environment, landed with a stunning impact. Ms. Holloway's carefully constructed composure faltered. The hospital? Her mother? This was not a childish prank. This was something else entirely. Something real. Something heartbreaking. The hospital, Lily, Ms. Holloway repeated, her voice losing some of its icy edge, a flicker of genuine concern now entering her tone. Your mother is in the hospital? Lily nodded, her small chin trembling. Yes, ma'am. She's very sick. And she lost her job. The one at the bakery. And the landlord. He says if we don't pay the rent soon, we'll have to leave our apartment. And we don't have anywhere else to go. Tears welled in her hazel eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely, her small hands clutching the manila envelope as if it were a life raft. So, she continued, her voice gaining a little more confidence. I thought, if I could get a job with Mr. Sterling, if I could explain, maybe he could help. My mommy said, she said he used to be a good man. Before he got so sad. Sad? Alistair Sterling? The Arctic Fox? Sad? Ms. Holloway stared at the child, her mind reeling. This was no longer just a breach of protocol. It was a profound, almost surreal, intersection of two disparate and equally, heartbreakingly human realities. Against her better judgment, against every protocol drilled into her over years of loyal, efficient service, Ms. Holloway made a decision. It was a reckless decision, a decision that could very well cost her job. But suddenly, she didn't care. Wait here, Lily, she said, her voice once again cool and professional, though if one listened very closely, one might have detected a hint of something else. Conspiracy, perhaps? Or maybe just a flicker of human warmth that had, against all odds, managed to survive in the frozen tundra of Alistair Sterling's executive suite. She rose from her desk, a tall, elegant figure and walked towards the imposing double doors that led to Mr. Sterling's private office. The small, crumpled manila envelope, which Lily had finally, trustingly, relinquished, held carefully in her hand. The fate of Lily Carter's audacious mission, and perhaps, just perhaps, the fate of Alistair Sterling's carefully frozen heart, now rested on the improbable intervention of his formidable and suddenly, unexpectedly, human executive assistant. Alistair Sterling looked up from the quarterly earnings report, his expression one of mild, controlled annoyance, as Miss Holloway entered his office without the customary, precisely timed buzz of the intercom. This was a breach of protocol, a deviation from the meticulously ordered universe he had so carefully constructed around himself. Such deviations were unwelcome. "Yes, Miss Holloway," he inquired, his voice as cool and crisp as the winter air outside his panoramic window. "Is there a problem with the Tokyo connection?" "No, Mr. Sterling," Miss Holloway replied, her own voice carefully neutral, though Alistair, who prided himself on his ability to detect even the slightest nuance of insubordination or inefficiency, thought he detected a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of something. Uncertainty? Or perhaps, even more alarmingly, amusement? "There's a visitor, an unscheduled applicant, for a position." Alistair's eyebrow arched. An unscheduled applicant? On the executive floor? This was not merely a breach of protocol. It was an absurdity. "Ms. Holloway," he said, his voice dropping a dangerous half-octave, "you are aware that I do not conduct impromptu interviews, and that all hiring for any position goes through human resources several floors below this one. Kindly redirect this applicant to the appropriate channels, and ensure that such a lapse in security does not occur again." He returned his attention to the earnings report, a clear, dismissive gesture. But Miss Holloway did not move. She remained standing before his desk, a slim, elegant figure, holding the slightly crumpled manila envelope in her perfectly manicured hands. "With all due respect, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, "I believe this particular applicant warrants a moment of your time. She is unconventional and rather insistent." Alistair looked up again, his patience wearing thin. Unconventional? Insistent? These were not qualities he valued or tolerated in his meticulously controlled world. "Ms. Holloway," he began, his voice taking on the icy edge that usually signaled the imminent termination of an unproductive conversation or, on occasion, an employee. But before he could continue, Ms. Holloway did something even more unprecedented. She stepped forward and placed a manila envelope on his vast, uncluttered desk. "Her name is Lily Carter, Mr. Sterling," she said, her gaze meeting his a flicker of something unreadable, defiance, pity, in her usually impassive eyes. "She is approximately 7 years old. And this," she tapped the envelope, "is her resume. She says it is a matter of her mother being in the hospital." 7 years old? A resume? Her mother in the hospital? Alistair Sterling stared at the envelope, then at Ms. Holloway, a muscle twitching in his lean, aristocratic jaw. Was this some sort of elaborate, misguided prank? Had his usually unflappable assistant finally succumbed to the pressures of her demanding job? He was about to deliver a scathing reprimand, to demand an immediate explanation for this outrageous breach of professional conduct, when his eyes fell upon the envelope itself. It was, as he had noted, crumpled, slightly grubby, and on its surface, written in large, unsteady, crayon-drawn letters, was a single word, hope. Beneath it, in smaller, equally childish script, were the words, "From Mr. A. Sterling. Urgent. Hope." The word seemed to mock him from the surface of the cheap manila paper. Hope was a commodity he had long since divested from, a foolish, sentimental illusion that had no place in the cold, hard calculus of his world. Yet there it was, staring up at him, in bright, defiant, childish crayon. He looked at Ms. Holloway, whose expression was now carefully, deliberately blank. She had played her card, taken her risk. The next move was his. with a sigh that was more an exhalation of controlled exasperation than genuine weariness. Alistair Sterling reached out a lean, perfectly manicured hand and picked up the envelope. It felt surprisingly light, almost insubstantial in his grasp. He turned it over, examining the childish script, the slightly sticky patch where a sweet had perhaps once been attached. This was, without a doubt, the most unprofessional, most ludicrous, most utterly inappropriate document ever to have graced his billion-dollar desk. He should throw it in the waste receptacle. He should summon security. He found himself, to his own profound astonishment, carefully slitting the envelope open with the silver letter opener that lay, like a ceremonial dagger, beside his Mont Blanc pen. Inside, there was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded neatly in half. He unfolded it. The resume was, as he had expected, a childish scrawl. Under the heading Lily Carter, My Skills, were listed in uneven, multicolored crayon lettering. 1. Good at listening, mostly. 2. Can draw happy pictures. 3. I share my snacks. 4. I try very hard. 5. I know how to be quiet when grown-ups are sad. That last one gave him pause. He felt a strange, unwelcome tightening in his chest, a ghost of an emotion he had thought long buried. He quickly suppressed it, his face remaining an impassive mask. Beneath My Skills, under the heading Job I Am Applying For, was a single enigmatic phrase, Director of Making Things Better. Director of Making Things Better? What in God's name did that even mean? It was gibberish, sentimental nonsense. He was about to toss the absurd document aside, his patience finally exhausted, when his eyes caught a small, almost invisible postscript at the very bottom of the page, written in a fainter, spidier crayon, as if added as an afterthought. P.S. I know you know how it feels when your heart is sad, Mr. Sterling. My mommy told me. She said you used to be a good man. Alistair Sterling froze. The blood seemed to drain from his face, leaving his skin feeling cold, clammy. How could this child possibly? He looked up at Ms. Holloway, his eyes, usually so cold and calculating, now wide with a sudden, raw vulnerability, a dawning, horrified comprehension. Ms. Holloway simply met his gaze, her expression still carefully neutral, but her eyes held a flicker of something. Empathy? Understanding? She is waiting outside, Mr. Sterling, Ms. Holloway said softly. She said it was very urgent, that her mother is in the hospital, and she needs a job to help. Alistair Sterling stared at the childish resume, at the haunting, impossibly perceptive postscript. His meticulously constructed world, his carefully guarded composure, seemed to be fracturing, an Arctic ice floe breaking apart under the unexpected warmth of a forgotten sun. Director of Making Things Better. He felt a tremor run through him, a tremor that had nothing to do with the building's foundations, and everything to do with the sudden, terrifying, and perhaps, just perhaps, liberating crumbling of his own. Send her in, Ms. Holloway, he said, his voice barely a whisper, a strange, unfamiliar huskiness in his tone. Send in the Director of Making Things Better. The massive, soundproof doors to Alistair Sterling's office whispered open, and Lily Carter stepped inside. She was even smaller than Ms. Holloway had described, a tiny, solitary figure dwarfed by the vast, opulent expanse of the room. The panoramic windows behind Alistair's monumental desk showcased a breathtaking, almost dizzying, view of the city sprawling below, a concrete and glass testament to human ambition and endeavor. But Lily didn't seem to notice the view, or the expensive art on the walls, or the general air of intimidating, rarefied power that permeated the space. Her gaze was fixed solely on Alistair Sterling, who sat behind his desk, a remote, formidable figure, his face partially obscured by the shadows cast by the strategically placed lighting. Lily clutched a small, well-loved and slightly battered teddy bear in one hand, a detail Miss Holloway had failed to mention, or perhaps had chosen not to, and in the other, she held another, smaller, piece of paper, folded into a neat square. She walked slowly, deliberately, across the plush, silent carpet, her scuffed shoes making no sound. She stopped a respectful distance from his desk, her small chin held high, her hazel eyes, those unervingly perceptive pools, fixed on his face. Alistair watched her approach, his mind still reeling from the resume, from that impossibly insightful postscript. Who was this child? How could she possibly know? He felt a strange, unwelcome prickling behind his eyelids, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades, not since. He ruthlessly suppressed it, his face hardening into its familiar, impassive mask. He would not be undone by a child, by a few cleverly, or perhaps accidentally, chosen words. "Miss Carter, I presume," he said, his voice cool, controlled, though if he were honest with himself, it lacked its usual unshakable authority. Lily nodded. "Yes, sir, Mr. Sterling." Her voice, though small, was clear and surprisingly steady in the vast, silent room. "Thank you for seeing me. Ms. Holloway said you were very busy." "I am," Alistair confirmed, his tone curt. "So, perhaps you can enlighten me as to the meaning of this rather unconventional application." He gestured towards the childish resume that still lay on his desk, a splash of incongruous, Crayola-bright color in his otherwise monochromatic world. "Director of Making Things Better? What precisely does that entail?" Lily took a small, steadying breath. "It means making things better, sir," she said, her voice earnest, her gaze direct. "My mommy, she's in the hospital. The big one with the sad windows. And she's very sick. The doctors say it's her heart. That it's broken." Her lower lip trembled, but she firmed it, her small hands clutching her teddy bear tighter. "And she lost her job, sir. The one at the bakery. Because she was too tired to stand all day. And the landlord, Mr. Henderson, he's not a very happy man. He says if we don't pay the rent soon, we'll have to leave our apartment. And we don't have anywhere else to go." Her words, so simple, so direct, so utterly devoid of self-pity, were a stark, brutal indictment of a reality Alistair Sterling had long since insulated himself from, a reality of precariousness, of desperation, of the quiet, grinding struggle for survival that was the daily lot of so many in the city sprawling below his window. "So," Lily continued, her voice gaining a little more confidence, "I thought, if I could get a job with you, Mr. Sterling, if I could help you make things better, maybe you could help us. Help my mommy. So her heart won't be so broken anymore. And so we can keep our little apartment. And maybe," she added, her eyes shining with a sudden, brilliant idea, "I could share my snacks with you, sir. When you get sad." My mommy said, she said you get sad sometimes, too. The innocent, heartfelt offer, the simple, profound empathy in her words, pierced through the layers of Alistair Sterling's icy composure with a force that left him breathless. He stared at her clear, honest eyes, at the unwavering compassion in her gaze, and he felt something, a fissure, a crack in the frozen wasteland of his heart. He thought of his own long-buried sorrow, of the loss that had defined his life, that had transformed him from a man who once knew how to love, to feel, into the cold, remote, Arctic fox he had become. "And how, Lily?" Alistair asked, his voice hoarse, raspy, barely a whisper. "How would you propose to make things better for me? For this company?" Lily held out the folded square of paper she carried. "I brought you this, sir," she said. It's a start." Alistair hesitated for a moment, then reached out and took the paper. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bright, cheerful crayons, the lines a little wobbly, the perspective charmingly skewed. It depicted a large, imposing office building, not unlike his own, but with a difference. From its windows, there were smiling, happy faces. In the sky above, there was a bright, smiling sun. And on the rooftop, there was a garden filled with vibrant, colorful flowers and a small, solitary figure, a man with silver hair, looking not down at the city below, but up at a single bright, shining star. Beneath the drawing, in careful, childish lettering, were the words, "Sometimes you have to look up to see the light." It was not a drawing of his lost daughter. It was not a direct reference to his personal tragedy. It was something far more subtle, far more profound. It was a child's simple, intuitive, and utterly devastatingly accurate prescription for his ailing soul. It was a reminder of a truth he had long forgotten. That hope, that light, that connection to something greater than oneself could still be found if one only had the courage to look up. And in that moment, Alastair Sterling, the ruthless CEO, the master of a global financial empire, the man who had thought himself immune to the messy, inconvenient, and utterly debilitating world of human emotion, found himself weeping. Not the ragged, choked sobs of his initial breakdown, but quiet, steady, and strangely, profoundly cleansing tears. Tears of sorrow, yes, but also for the first time in a very long time, tears of something else. Something that felt disturbingly and wonderfully like hope. He looked at Lily, at her small, earnest face, at her quiet, unwavering empathy, and he knew, with a certainty that resonated in the deepest, most forgotten corners of his soul, that this child, this tiny, improbable director of making things better, had just offered him a lifeline, a chance to not just save her mother, but to perhaps, just perhaps, save himself. The quiet, cleansing tears of Alastair Sterling, shed in the vast, opulent solitude of his office, were a baptism, a washing away of years of carefully constructed composure, of ruthless, emotional detachment. He wept not just for his own, long-buried sorrow, but for the profound, simple, and utterly unexpected gift of human connection that this small, determined child had so innocently, so bravely offered him. Lily Carter, her own mission seemingly accomplished, simply stood beside him, her small hand still clutching her battered teddy bear, her hazel eyes filled with a solemn, almost adult empathy. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence, her quiet, unwavering compassion, was a far more eloquent and far more powerful comfort than any words could ever be. Gradually, the storm of emotion began to subside. Alastair wiped at his tear-streaked face with his silk handkerchief, feeling exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely lighter. The crushing weight that had burdened his soul for so long seemed to have eased, fractionally, as if the act of finally acknowledging his own profound, emotional bankruptcy had somehow, miraculously, opened the door to a new and infinitely more hopeful kind of wealth. He looked at Lily, truly looked at her, for the first time not as an anomaly, an interruption, but as a messenger, a tiny, improbable, and profoundly insightful sage. "Thank you, Lily," he said, his voice hoarse, raspy, but imbued with a new, unfamiliar warmth. "Thank you for reminding me to look up." Lily offered him a small, shy smile. "You're welcome, Mr. Sterling. My mommy says, she says everyone needs a little help finding their stars sometimes." Her mommy, Sarah Carter, a name he had finally, through a discreet, almost instantaneous inquiry from Ms. Holloway, placed. A quiet, dedicated junior assistant in the Alara Foundation, a woman who had, according to the brief, almost forgotten HR records, left his employ abruptly years ago due to unforeseen family circumstances. He now understood. Her mother, her own heart broken by a personal tragedy, had seen his, had understood his, and had, in her own quiet, desperate way, sent her daughter, a tiny emissary of hope, to try and mend them both. The thought was both humbling and deeply, profoundly moving. "Your mother, Lily," Alastair said, his voice gentle. "She is in City General Hospital, I believe, the one with the sad windows." Lily nodded, her small chin trembling. "Yes, sir. Room 4B. The doctors say, they say she needs a new heart. A transplant. But we don't have enough money. And the insurance, it ran out." The stark, brutal reality of her situation, delivered with such childish simplicity, was a fresh stab of guilt, a stark reminder of the harsh, indifferent world that existed just beyond the tinted, soundproofed windows of his office. He, Alastair Sterling, a man who could move markets, who could make or break fortunes with a single phone call, lived in a world where a woman's life, a mother's heart, could be held hostage by the cold, hard calculus of hospital bills and insurance policies. "Lily," he began, his voice firm, decisive, a spark of his old, commanding authority returning. but now tempered with a new, profound sense of purpose. I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your job application has been accepted. You are now officially the director of making things better for Sterling Valerius Industries. Your salary, he paused, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, will be considerable. More than enough for the rent, I assure you. And more than enough for an unlimited supply of blueberry muffin ingredients. Lily's eyes widened, a dawning, incredulous hope in their hazel depths. In your first official duty, Director Carter, Alastair continued, his voice now imbued with a quiet, unwavering resolve, is to accompany me to City General Hospital. We're going to see your mother, and we're going to make things better. He rose from his desk, his movements no longer those of a remote, formidable CEO, but of a man, a human being, on a mission. He reached out his hand, not to dismiss, not to command, but to invite. Shall we, Director? He asked, his voice a low, gentle rumble. Lily looked at his outstretched hand, then at his face, at the new, unfamiliar light in his wintry eyes. And she smiled. A brilliant, radiant, and utterly beautifully hopeful smile. She placed her small hand in his, her trust absolute, her faith unwavering. The Arctic Fox, it seemed, had found his heart, and the director of making things better, hand in hand with the man she had come to save, was about to embark on her first and most important assignment. The journey to the hospital was not just a drive across town. It was a journey from one world to another, from the cold, sterile heights of corporate power to the messy, fragile, and ultimately, far more meaningful realm of human connection, of shared sorrow, and of the profound, transformative power of a single, simple, and utterly life-altering act of kindness. The arrival of Alastair Sterling and his newly appointed 7-year-old director of making things better at City General Hospital sent a ripple of bewildered consternation through the hushed, antiseptic corridors of the cardiac care unit. Nurses, doctors, and administrators, accustomed to Alastair Sterling's usual remote, almost mythical presence, his rare visits were typically brief, formal, and accompanied by a phalanx of grim-faced lawyers and corporate advisors, stared in stunned disbelief as the formidable CO, his face a mask of quiet determination, walked hand-in-hand with a small, bright-eyed girl in a faded floral dress, who clutched a battered teddy bear in her free hand. They went directly to room 4B. Inside, Sarah Carter lay pale and still amidst a tangle of tubes and wires, her breathing shallow, her eyes closed, a silent, fragile figure in the humming, beeping heart of the ICU. Lily rushed to her mother's bedside, her small hand reaching out to touch her mother's, her quiet, whispered words a litany of love, of reassurance, of a desperate, unwavering hope. Alastair Sterling stood in the doorway, a silent, powerful observer, his gaze taking in the scene with a new, almost painful clarity. He saw not just a patient, a case number, a medical problem to be solved. He saw a mother, a woman, a human being whose life, whose future, hung in a precarious and deeply unjust balance. He saw his own past, his own grief, his own agonizing powerlessness in the face of illness, reflected in the small, determined face of the little girl by the bedside. And in that moment, the last vestiges of the Arctic Fox, of the cold, detached master of the universe, melted away, replaced by a simple, profound, and utterly human empathy. He summoned the head of the cardiac unit, a renowned, but overworked and under-resourced surgeon named Dr. Albright. He listened with a quiet, focused intensity as she explained Sarah Carter's condition, the severity of her heart failure, the urgent need for a transplant, the daunting, almost insurmountable financial and logistical hurdles that lay in their path. Alastair Sterling, a man who had built his empire on identifying problems and implementing solutions, saw not hurdles, but opportunities. Opportunities to use his immense power, his vast resources, his global network, not for personal gain, but for good. He made a series of phone calls, his voice, now calm, commanding, but imbued with a new, almost spiritual authority, a voice that brooked no argument, that tolerated no delay. He spoke to the top cardiac transplant surgeons in the world, to the heads of international organ donation networks, to the CEOs of rival pharmaceutical companies. His words a symphony of quiet persuasion, of subtle pressure, of an unwavering, unshakable commitment to a single, simple goal, to save Sarah Carter's life. Doors that had been closed miraculously opened. Waiting lists that had been years long, suddenly, inexplicably shortened. Bureaucratic red tape that had seemed impenetrable simply dissolved. The full, formidable weight of Alastair Sterling's empire, once a tool of corporate conquest, was now being wielded as an instrument of healing, of hope, of a profound and deeply personal redemption. Within days, a donor heart was found. A perfect match. The transplant surgery, performed by a team of the world's leading surgeons, flown in on Alastair's private jet, was a resounding success. Sarah Carter's recovery, though slow, was steady, her own quiet, resilient spirit, buoyed by the unwavering love of her daughter and the unexpected, miraculous intervention of the man she had once, so long ago, believed to be a good man, now a powerful, healing force. The story of Alastair Sterling's personal and very public commitment to saving the life of his special consultant's mother became a quiet legend, a modern fable of corporate compassion, of a billionaire's profound and utterly unexpected transformation. But for Alastair, it was not about public relations, not about image, not about a strategic tax-deductible act of philanthropy. It was about making things better. It was about honoring the memory of his lost daughter, Ilara, by embodying the very compassion, the very kindness that had been her defining characteristic. It was about repaying a debt, not to Lily, not to Sarah, but to himself, to the man he had once been, the man he was finally beginning to become again. The Ilara Foundation, under the joint and now officially funded leadership of Alastair, Sarah, and its newly promoted and handsomely compensated Chief Ideas Officer, Lily Carter, underwent a profound and deeply meaningful renaissance. It became a true beacon of hope, a powerful force for good. Its mission not just to alleviate suffering, but to find and to nurture the lost stars in every community, in every life it touched. And Alastair Sterling, the man who had once ruled a kingdom of numbers, now found himself presiding over a different and infinitely more valuable empire. An empire of kindness, of compassion, of a quiet, profound, and deeply, beautifully human hope. His own lost star, he realized, was not just a memory, not just a name, not just a sorrow to be buried. It was a light that had been rekindled, reignited by the unwavering, innocent, and ultimately life-altering faith of a little girl who had dared to show up for a job interview, who had dared to speak a truth he had long forgotten, and who had, with a simple crayon-drawn picture, shown in the way back to himself. The director of Making Things Better had, indeed, made things better. Not just for her mother, not just for a sad, lonely billionaire, but for a world that so often, so tragically, forgets to look up and to see the light. The years that followed saw Alastair Sterling's transformation from the Arctic fox of global finance to a visionary philanthropist and compassionate leader become the stuff of quiet, almost mythical legend. The story of Lily Carter, the little girl who had walked into his office with a crayon-drawn resume and a heart full of hope, became a touchstone within Sterling Valerius Industries, a modern fable of the profound, often unexpected, power of human connection, of empathy, of a single, simple act of courage in the face of overwhelming despair. The Ilara Foundation, under the inspired and often delightfully unconventional leadership of Alastair, Sarah, and its beloved Chief Ideas Officer, Lily, Thrive, its innovative, human-centric approach to philanthropy setting a new global standard. They built hope gardens on the rooftops of corporate skyscrapers, established starlight storytelling programs in children's hospitals around the world, and funded listening lounges in underserved communities, creating spaces where the unheard could find a voice, where the unseen could be seen, where the lost could, finally, begin to find their way home. Sarah Carter, her own heart now strong and full, became a passionate, eloquent advocate for the Foundation's work. Her personal story of survival, of a mother's love, of the miraculous kindness of a stranger, inspiring millions. Her blueberry muffins, now famous, became a symbol of the Foundation's mission, a simple, tangible expression of warmth, of care, of a community that refused to let anyone fall through the cracks. Lily, of course, remained the soul of the enterprise. As she grew from a small, determined girl into a bright, compassionate young woman, her intuitive wisdom, her unwavering optimism, her profound, almost spiritual, understanding of human need continued to guide the Foundation's work. She never lost her belief in the power of happy pictures, of shared snacks, of the simple, profound, and utterly transformative act of truly listening to another person's story. Alastair Sterling found a new and infinitely more fulfilling purpose in his life. He was still a formidable CEO, his intellect as sharp, his business acumen as keen as ever. But his ambition was now tempered by a profound sense of responsibility. His decisions guided not just by the cold, hard logic of the bottom line, but by a new, unwavering commitment to the well-being of his employees, of his community, of the world his company inhabited. He became a champion for corporate social responsibility, a vocal advocate for a more just, more equitable, and more human form of capitalism. The kindness quota on his executive floor, once a source of cynical amusement, had become a deeply ingrained part of the company's culture, a quiet, daily reminder of the transformative power of empathy, of respect, of a shared humanity. He never forgot the lesson Lily had taught him on that first, fateful day. To look up, he would often, late at night, alone in his vast, now less sterile, office, gaze out at the sprawling, glittering city below, and then his eyes would drift upwards to the vast, indifferent beauty of the night sky. He would search for the brightest star, and he would whisper a name, Ilara, not with the old, familiar ache of grief, but with a new, quiet, and deeply, profoundly peaceful sense of gratitude. He had not lost his daughter. She was with him, always a guiding light, a silent, loving presence, her spirit alive in the laughter of the children the Foundation helped, in the renewed hope of the families it supported, in the simple, profound, and utterly beautiful act of making things better.